Today, we're looking at something absolutely fascinating. It's this wild collision of two totally different worlds. On one hand, you've got the chaotic, incredibly high-stakes environment of a modern medical crisis. And on the other, a 2,000-year-old philosophy cooked up by ancient thinkers in togas. Now, you might be thinking those two things have absolutely nothing in common. But as we're about to see, ancient Stoicism is literally being deployed right now on the front lines of acute mental health care to pull patients back from the brink.
Okay, let's dive right into this. I want you to imagine hitting absolute rock bottom. We are talking about standing at that incredibly fragile threshold where deep despair meets raw survival. It's that dark, suffocating place where picturing the future feels entirely inconceivable, and where for some people, death actually appears to be the last escape. And this isn't just a philosophical thought experiment. This is the stark, everyday reality for frontline workers dealing with acute mental health crises. Because when a person's life collapses, it rarely happens neatly.
In fact, when that kind of collapse happens, individuals are almost always overwhelmed by what the source material calls the unholy trinity of human suffering: anger, fear, and sadness. And we aren't just talking about passing moods here. When these three intense emotions hit you all at once, they completely hijack the senses and heavily distort your perspective on reality. A person gets trapped in this terrifying, vicious cycle. They're simultaneously consumed by regret for the past and just absolutely terrified of the future.
Now, if you're training to be a mental health nurse today, you're going to go through some incredibly rigorous stuff. You learn all about specific diagnoses, the complex mechanics of medication, how to administer clinical rating scales, and how to execute these really advanced psychotherapeutic interventions. But here is the massive gap in the modern medical system. Very little of that clinical training actually addresses the raw essence of being human. I mean, when someone is in the middle of a total breakdown, a clinical rating scale doesn't exactly offer much comfort, right? People feel entirely powerless, which leads to this dangerous state of total paralysis by analysis.
And a lot of this paralysis actually stems from what modern psychology calls the tyranny of shoulds and musts. It's a profoundly dangerous modern belief system. It's this rigid conviction that the world should treat us better or that we must succeed at all costs, otherwise we're just a total failure. These demands chain us to expectations that life simply never promised to meet. And when things don't go our way, well, those chains pull tight and we essentially drown in our own distress.
Actually, let me just pause right here and ask you, how many times have you completely spun out of control simply because you are demanding that the universe follow your exact script? Just think about it for a second. How much of your daily anxiety comes from screaming internally about how things should be instead of just dealing with how they actually are? It is a trap every single one of us falls into. Well, the solution to this very modern crisis actually dates back over 2,000 years. Enter Paul Sutton. He's an NHS-registered mental health nurse in the UK who works directly in a crisis team. And he discovered that the absolute most effective tool in his medical arsenal isn't found in a modern nursing textbook at all. It's found in ancient Stoic philosophy. You see, the Hellenistic philosophers didn't view philosophy as some dusty theoretical academic subject. No way. They saw the philosopher as a physician of the soul, and they viewed their teachings as therapeia, which literally translates to therapy for the psyche. And honestly, it brilliantly illustrates a key point. Stoicism isn't just some interesting historical footnote. It is the exact foundational bedrock for today's most effective evidence-based psychiatric treatments. Things like cognitive behavioral therapy, or CBT, and rational emotive behavior therapy. The ancient wisdom directly feeds the modern science. So how do we actually apply this stuff? Let's break down three specific, life-saving Stoic skills used on the front lines today. Skill 1, the dichotomy of control.
So the philosopher Epictetus kicked off his famous work, the Enchiridion, with what is arguably the most powerful psychological tool ever invented. He wrote, "Some things are up to us, and some are not." It sounds ridiculously simple, I know. But in a crisis, everything feels completely out of your control. To cure that overwhelming feeling, you have to ruthlessly separate what is actually yours to manage from what simply isn't.
So the crucial point is how this actually plays out in a real, boots-on-the-ground crisis. When Paul Sutton works with a patient, he breaks their reality down into two buckets. First, what is in your control? Well, taking a short walk is. Using a breathing technique is. Reaching out to a trusted friend or accepting medication, those are 100% in your control. But what is outside your control? How your ex-partner responds to you, the waiting times for medical services, or how quickly your external life circumstances will change. By making this simple, rootless distinction, the impossible suddenly becomes smaller and the unmanageable becomes highly practical. And hey,
If you're thinking this is all just neat theory, consider how Stoicism itself was born. The founder of Stoicism, Zeno, was a wealthy merchant who experienced a devastating shipwreck near Athens. He literally lost everything he owned in an instant. But instead of letting that total lack of control destroy him, he used that profound setback to discover philosophy and create an entirely new way of living. He focused only on what he could control, his mind.
Skill 2. Fact or opinion. This one is all about stopping that terrifying mental spiral. You know, the one fueled by anxiety and endless what-ifs. The Stoic philosopher Seneca captured this perfectly when he wrote, "We suffer more often in imagination than in reality." Anxiety totally thrives on the what-ifs, the terrifying stories we tell ourselves about a future that hasn't even happened yet.
Now, what's really interesting here is how clearly we can separate a grounding truth from a drowning assumption. To stop a mental spiral, you have to force yourself to ask, is this a fact or is this just an opinion? The fact might simply be, I am safe right now and I have people who support me. The opinion, the destructive story is, things will never get better and nobody would care if I was gone. Fact anchors us. Opinion drowns us.
To actually get to those facts, you kind of have to use the Socratic method on your own brain. Basically, if your brain tells you life is terrible, you've got to gently interrogate it. Ask yourself, what do I actually mean by life? Do I mean every single part of my entire existence or just this specific, highly stressful moment? Ask, what do I mean by terrible? Is it literally unbearable or is it just really hard right now? Defining your terms breaks down those vague, catastrophic statements into highly specific, manageable pieces that you can successfully challenge.
Seriously, take a step back with me right now. Think about the absolute biggest problem stressing you out today. I guarantee you are confusing the raw, objective facts of the situation with the horrifying, exaggerated movie your imagination is directing about it. Cut the camera. Stop the movie. Stick strictly to the objective facts.
Skill 3. The view from above.
You know, when you're in the middle of a crisis, your thoughts feel so absolute, right? It creates this terrifying tunnel vision. The Roman emperor and philosopher Marcus Aurelius famously practiced a specific technique to counter this, which the philosopher Pierre Hadot later called generating an oceanic feeling. The entire goal here is to create cognitive distance from your pain by mentally stepping back from the absolute deluge of your daily problems. To actually practice this view from above, you intentionally zoom out. Marcus Aurelius would mentally elevate himself to look down at the thousands of human herds, the countless voyages happening on stormy seas, and the sheer awe-inspiring vastness of the entire world. Now, by stepping back like this, your problems don't magically disappear, but they do lose their agonizing grip on your mind because they no longer define everything. You realize that your intense suffering, while totally valid, is just one single wave in a much wider sea of human experience. Reclaiming your ultimate agency. Because listen, these ancient ideas, they were never meant to be locked away in some dusty lecture hall. They are tactical, practical tools engineered for survival. Whether you are navigating a really frustrating day at work or a life-altering mental health crisis, the keystone of your survival is exactly the same. You cannot always control what happens to you, but you possess the ultimate untouchable power to control how you respond. That is your agency. And as frontline nurses like Paul Sutton prove every single day, sometimes that realization isn't just philosophical, it is literally life-saving.
So, I want to leave you with this final thought. Which of these 3 Stoic tools, the dichotomy of control, separating fact from opinion, or the view from above, are you going to use to pull yourself out of the chaos today? If this explainer helped you find your anchor and understand the sheer power of this ancient wisdom, I highly encourage you to keep exploring these tools. See you in the next explainer.